The call came while I was finalizing my presentation for a room full of investors, men in pressed suits who held the power to either propel my company to new heights or sink it with a single disapproving glance. My hand hovered over the clicker, eyes skimming the polished slides glowing on the screen, when my phone buzzed beside me. A name I hadn't spoken aloud in 5 years lit up the screen, Mom. For a moment, the world around me blurred, the hum of my assistant outside the glass door, the distant chatter of my team down the hall, even the steady beat of my own heart. It all faded into the past. Her name was still saved as Mom, though I had promised myself I would delete it. I should have deleted it. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but I hesitated. That single second was all it took for the dam to crack. Memories I had buried beneath work and success flooded back, my mother's voice, warm with false affection, as she told me why I wasn't good enough. "It's what your father would have wanted," she had said, her hand resting gently on mine as if that could soften the blow. "Jake is the man of the family, Emily. He deserves the house, the land, the business. You understand, right? You're strong. You'll be fine." I wasn't fine. I had never been fine. Before I could stop myself, I pressed accept. "Hey, sweetheart," her voice poured through the speaker, drenched in that same syrupy sweetness that once made me believe she cared. That voice used to be my comfort. Now, it was a weapon. I gripped my coffee mug so hard my knuckles turned white, my stomach twisted into knots. I forced my voice to remain steady. "What do you want?" She gave a soft laugh, the kind designed to disarm me. "Can't a mother check in on her daughter?" I almost laughed too, but mine would have been raw, bitter. 5 years of silence, I said, "and now you're thinking about me?" There was a pause, the kind that reveals more than words ever could. I knew this dance too well. She wasn't calling because she missed me. She needed something. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," she said finally. "About our family." The word family was like glass in my throat. Family. That word had been used to cut me down, to justify making me invisible while they handed everything my father built to my brother Jake, the golden boy, the heir, the man. I stared out the window of my corner office overlooking the San Francisco skyline, the city I had carved a place for myself in without them. My success was my revenge, built brick by brick from every ounce of pain they had left me with. "I'm busy," I said, keeping my tone clipped, professional. "I run a company now." There was a flicker of surprise in her voice, genuine or not, I couldn't tell. "That's wonderful. What kind of—" "Stop," I cut her off. My assistant, Kara, peeked in, sensing something was wrong. I waved her away without breaking eye contact with the horizon beyond the glass. "Whatever you need, ask Jake. He got the house. The money. Everything. I'm sure he'd love to help." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Jake isn't in a position to help right now." Of course he wasn't. I had heard the rumors, his gambling, the failed business ventures, the debts piling up faster than he could charm his way out of them. The golden boy had turned to rust. "That's not my problem," I said, my voice like ice, even as my hand trembled slightly around the mug. "You made your choice, Mom. You chose him. Now you live with it. Emily, please. I'm your mother." Those words ignited something volcanic inside me. Before I knew it, I was standing, my chair scraping against the floor. "Are you?" I snapped. Because mothers don't tell their daughters they're worth less than their sons. Mothers don't throw away 22 years of love over some outdated fantasy about bloodlines and inheritance. The room spun with anger, but I held my ground. My best friend and marketing director, Sarah, had slipped into the room, eyes wide with concern. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, grounding me. I did what I thought was best at the time. My mother's voice wavered, but I heard the undercurrent of desperation. "Things are different now. I need you." I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth, she didn't want to reconnect. She needed help. She needed money. And I was her last resort. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it settle. This was no longer the girl they had cast aside. This was Emily Carter, CEO. The woman who had built an empire from the ashes they left behind. "You need money," I said flatly. Her silence was confirmation. "Well, let me tell you something, Mom. That company you were so surprised about? I built it with nothing. No inheritance. No handouts. Just grit, sleepless nights, and the desire to prove you all wrong." "Sweetheart, please." "I'm not finished," I snapped. "You want to talk about the future? Fine. Come to my office. Next Thursday. 2 p.m. I'll show you exactly what your daughter became without you." Before she could respond, I hung up. My legs gave out, and I collapsed back into my chair, the phone clattering onto the desk. My heart pounded in my chest, rage, hurt, satisfaction all swirling into one. Sarah knelt beside me. "Are you okay?" I wasn't. But I smiled, cold and resolute. "She has some nerve, doesn't she? 5 years of silence, and now she needs me." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked cautiously. I leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Remember that rundown nursing home we toured last month for the community outreach project? The one on the edge of town that smelled like bleach and hopelessness?" She nodded. "I think I just found its newest resident." Sarah's eyes widened. "Emily, are you sure?" I turned toward the window, looking over the city I owned now. This was my kingdom, built without their help. "I'm not just sure," I whispered. "I'm ready." "Do you think I'm being too harsh? Or do you believe I deserve better after what they did to me? Comment 111 if you think I deserve better." When I hung up that phone call with my mother, the shaking in my hands didn't stop. I stared at the sleek skyline of San Francisco beyond my office window, but what I saw was the past. I saw a different version of myself, a girl who still believed that family meant unconditional love. A girl who hadn't yet learned that, in my family, love came with conditions. 5 years ago, I was 22, and my world had just fallen apart. My father, my rock, died suddenly from a heart attack. He collapsed right there in our backyard in Houston, mowing the lawn like he always did on Sunday mornings. I had been inside, helping my mother prep lunch, when I heard her scream. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Just like that, the man who had believed I could do anything was taken from me. And with him, every bit of stability I had known. At the time, I had been accepted into the MBA program at NYU. My acceptance letter was still pinned to the corkboard above my childhood desk. But as I stood in the funeral home, watching my mother's shoulders shake with grief and my brother Jake scroll through his phone in the corner, I made a decision. I chose family. I put the acceptance letter in a drawer and told myself there would be other opportunities. My mother needed me. Jake? He was always unreliable, and I knew, deep down, that he wouldn't step up. So, I would. Those first few months were the hardest. Grief is a strange thing. It wraps around your chest like a weight, making it hard to breathe, but you still have to get up and keep moving. The bills didn't stop because we were grieving. The mortgage on the house, my father's medical expenses, the utilities, they all piled up. My mother was too heartbroken to deal with any of it. So, I took over. I got a job as a barista at a local coffee shop in the mornings. I remember the sting of those 5 a.m. alarms, dragging myself out of bed before the sun rose. I made lattes for businessmen who barely looked at me, my hands trembling from exhaustion. When my shift ended at noon, I'd grab a quick sandwich, if I could afford one, before heading to my second job at a restaurant downtown. I waited tables until midnight, plastering on a smile while drunk customers snapped their fingers at me and left crumpled dollar bills as tips. I'd get home past 1 a.m., feet aching so badly I'd cry in the shower. But I didn't stop. Because I thought it mattered. I thought taking care of my family was what you did when you loved them. Jake didn't think that way. While I was pulling double shifts, he was posting photos from Las Vegas, bottle service, poker tables, pool parties with girls in bikinis draping themselves over his shoulders. Hashtag living my best life. I remember one night, coming home after a brutal 16-hour shift, I opened Instagram and saw him posing next to a brand new Mustang. The caption read, "Work hard, play harder." I had barely enough gas money to get to work the next morning. But when I brought it up to my mother, she just sighed. "He's under a lot of pressure, Emily. He's the future of this family. Your father expected so much from him. The future of this family." That's what she always said. As if my future, my dreams, didn't matter. I should have seen it coming. But when the will was read, it still hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Our family home, the land my father worked so hard for, the savings account he built over decades, all of it went to Jake. My mother made sure of it. I remember standing in that lawyer's office, my throat tight, while she smiled at Jake and said, "Your father would want you to carry on his legacy." "And to me?" She turned with a hand on my arm, voice soft like she was doing me a favor. "You'll figure something out, honey. You're tough." I nodded because what else could I do? I smiled because I didn't want to cry in front of him. But inside, something shattered. That was the last day I believed I was part of that family. I packed a single suitcase and drove 1,900 miles west to San Francisco in my beat-up Honda Civic. I slept on a friend's couch for the first few weeks before scraping together enough for a 300-square-foot studio apartment. It had a leaking sink and the walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors' late-night arguments through the drywall. But it was mine. I worked 3 jobs, freelancing in graphic design, doing social media management for startups, and bartending on weekends, while building what would eventually become Carter Creative Solutions, my company. There were nights I worked until sunrise, fueling myself on ramen noodles and discount coffee, knowing that every hour I poured into this business was one more step away from them. Every time Jake posted another photo, him at a yacht party, him with a new Rolex, I signed another client. Every time my mother liked his photos, leaving heart emojis and comments like, "So proud of you, sweetheart," I made another sale. I built my success out of spite. Out of pain. Out of the need to prove, to them, but mostly to myself, that I was worth something. That I didn't need their house. Or their money. But you know what I did need? Their respect. Their belief in me. I needed to know that my father's death hadn't erased me from their version of family. But that never came. When I landed my first major deal, a 6-figure contract with a national retailer, I called my mother, excited, wanting her to share in my victory. She didn't pick up. When I texted her, she replied 3 days later with a thumbs-up emoji. Jake got a new boat that month. She posted about it 4 times. So, when my phone lit up last week, and I saw her name after all these years, you understand why my first instinct was to press decline. But I didn't. I picked up. And now she wants my help. Now that Jake has burned through every dollar and left their so-called legacy in ruins. Now, suddenly, I matter again. But this time, it's different. This time, I'm not the desperate 22-year-old hoping for her mother's approval. I'm the woman who built something from nothing. I'm the woman who stands at the top of a company she created with her own 2 hands. I'm the one holding all the power. And I'm done asking for their respect. Do you know what it feels like to give everything to people who never see your worth? To sacrifice your dreams, only to be treated like you were never good enough? Comment 222 if you've ever felt overlooked like I was. A month before my mother's voice slithered back into my life, before her name flashed across my phone screen like a ghost from a past I had buried, I found out the truth. The final nail in the coffin of what I once called family. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember that because Tuesdays were when I let myself breathe, no back-to-back investor meetings, no late-night client calls, just a few precious hours to catch up on emails with a decent latte from the boutique coffee shop downstairs. That day, the barista even spelled my name right. But then the email came. An automated alert from the county records office, a leftover subscription from when I still cared about the house I grew up in. Foreclosure notice. Auction date set. Property seized. My father's house. The house he built with his own hands, brick by brick after working overtime shifts at the factory, the house where we celebrated every birthday and Christmas, the house that was supposed to be my brother's legacy. It was gone. Jake had lost it. I froze, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt that same hollow ache from the day the will was read, when my mother placed the entire Carter family estate into Jake's undeserving hands, smiling like it was some grand honor. He's the man of the family, she had said, he'll take care of it. He didn't. He gambled it away. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone. For the first time in nearly a year, I called my mother. She picked up on the third ring, her voice still carrying that soft southern charm she used to manipulate everyone around her. Emily, sweetheart, it's so good to hear from you. When were you going to tell me? My voice was cold, clipped. I didn't need pleasantries. I needed answers. There was a pause. Then, a sigh. Honey, I know it's hard, but Jake's trying his best. He's been under a lot of pressure. There it was. The same damn line. The same excuse I had heard my entire life. Pressure? I snapped. He lost Dad's house. The house Dad built. The house she gave him instead of me. He didn't protect it. He sold it off to cover his gambling debts. She tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. You said he was the future of this family. That he was the one who deserved everything. Is this what Dad wanted? Is this the legacy you were so desperate to protect? Her voice wavered, but not with guilt, only exhaustion. Jake's going through a rough patch. We all make mistakes. He needs support right now. I almost laughed. Support. The kind of support I never got. The kind I begged for when I was scraping by in that 300-square-foot apartment, eating ramen for weeks straight, just to keep the lights on. You mean he needs money, I said flatly. Again. Another pause. We're all struggling, Emily. I had to move out of the house. I'm in an apartment now. It's not what I'm used to. Something in her tone made my stomach turn. I knew that voice. It was the one she used when she wanted sympathy. Manipulation wrapped in self-pity. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. Where are you living? She gave me the address. I looked it up as we spoke. A low-income complex on the outskirts of Houston. Peeling paint. Rusted railings. The kind of place you double-check that your doors are locked every night. I should have felt sorry for her. I should have felt something. But all I felt was rage. You chose this, I said through clenched teeth. You chose him over me. You gave him everything. And now, he's left you with nothing. Emily, I ended the call. I couldn't listen to it anymore. Not the excuses. Not the lies. Not the pathetic attempts to justify the betrayal. That weekend, I flew to Houston. I told myself it was for closure, to see the house one last time before it was handed over to a bank and stripped of every memory it held. But part of me needed to see the wreckage up close, the wreckage they had caused. I parked across the street, staring through the windshield at the home that had once been my whole world. The porch swing my father built creaked in the wind, barely hanging on by rusted chains. The garden my mother used to fuss over was now overgrown, weeds choking out the rose bushes she once loved. A large red notice was plastered on the front door, foreclosed. Property to be auctioned. I gripped the steering wheel, my nails digging into the leather. I could almost hear my father's laughter echoing from the backyard, see him standing by the grill, beer in hand, telling me I could do anything I set my mind to. He believed in me. And now everything he built had been reduced to this, a pile of debts, lost to greed and irresponsibility. I sat there for an hour, unable to move. I watched the sun set behind that house, casting long shadows across the lawn where Jake and I used to play catch. But that little girl was gone. The sister who believed in family was gone. All that was left was the woman who built an empire from nothing. The woman they had underestimated. As night fell, I made a decision. I was done. Done being the forgotten daughter. Done hoping for their approval. Done pretending that family meant anything other than pain. No more loyalty. No more family. I would take back what was mine. But I wouldn't just survive this time. I would win. They had gambled with my future. Now it was my turn to show them what happens when you bet against me. Do you know what it feels like to look at the people who are supposed to love you the most and realize they never chose you? To know that, no matter how hard you fought, you were always second place, an afterthought? Comment 333 if you think it's time I took back my power. After that visit to my father's house, the shell of what was once my home, I boarded my flight back to San Francisco with a resolve so sharp it felt like steel in my veins. There was no more room for emotion. No more space for tears or nostalgia. That house, that family, had been buried alongside my father. What remained was a battlefield. And I had just declared war. The next morning, I was back in my office, wearing my armor, a tailored black suit, red lipstick, and the kind of heels that clicked with authority across marble floors. My assistant, Kara, greeted me with the day's schedule, but my mind was already racing ahead. Every smile I gave, every confident nod I offered in meetings, it was all a performance. Beneath the surface, I was plotting every move. The first call I made was to my lawyer. Not the firm I normally used for contracts and business filings. No, I needed someone different. Someone ruthless. I hired Mark Caldwell, a specialist in asset recovery and financial investigations. His reputation was built on tearing apart men who thought they were untouchable. I needed that kind of firepower now. I want everything, I told him during our first meeting. Bank accounts, property holdings, debts, find it all. And I need it fast. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't question me. By the end of the day, he had already started digging into my brother's failed ventures and my mother's dwindling savings. What he found wasn't surprising, but it was worse than I expected. Jake was drowning. He owed tens of thousands to private lenders, some with less than legal reputations. His last business, a construction firm, had folded after he mismanaged funds. He was months behind on his condo payments. And my mother? She had been supporting him for years, draining her retirement savings until there was almost nothing left. The only reason she hadn't been evicted yet was because she had borrowed from a cousin in Dallas. They were both circling the drain. And now, they had reached for me like I was their lifeline. I wasn't. The second step was securing what I had built. I called my financial advisor and had him restructure my holdings. We opened a new account under a separate LLC, transferring ownership of my company's shares into it. If Jake or my mother ever tried to come after me legally, which, knowing their desperation, wasn't out of the question, they would find nothing. Everything was shielded. Are you expecting a lawsuit? My advisor asked cautiously. Just being proactive, I said with a smile. Next was the nursing home. I flew back to Houston under the pretense of a business trip, but I had only one destination in mind. It was a facility on the outskirts of town, Meadowbrook Senior Living. That name sounded pleasant enough, but the reality was far from it. The paint on the walls was cracked, the air smelled like bleach masking something worse, and the residents, mostly elderly people without families, sat slumped in wheelchairs, staring blankly at a muted television. The woman at the front desk, a tired-looking nurse in her 50s, greeted me with the strained politeness of someone who had seen too much. Looking for placement for a loved one? She asked. I nodded, feigning concern. My mother's health is declining. I just want to make sure she's somewhere safe. She led me on a tour, threadbare carpets, shared rooms with plastic curtains for privacy, cafeteria trays with watery mashed potatoes. I smiled and nodded the entire time, but inside, my chest burned. This would be my mother's fate. This was where she would end up, sitting in one of those chairs, invisible to the world, just like she had made me feel for years. I scheduled an evaluation for her the following week. Everything was falling into place. Back in San Francisco, I stepped seamlessly into my public role. The same week I finalized my mother's paperwork for Meadowbrook, I stood on stage at the West Coast Business Conference, accepting the Business Innovation Award. Cameras flashed, and applause filled the ballroom as I gripped the crystal trophy, proof that I had made it, proof that I was untouchable. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. When I started Carter Creative Solutions, I had nothing but a laptop, a folding chair, and determination. People told me I was too young, too inexperienced. Some said I wasn't capable, because I didn't come from wealth. But every doubt became my motivation. I built this company from the ground up, and I'm standing here today because I refuse to let anyone decide my worth. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping. I smiled, but behind that smile was something darker. They didn't know. They saw success. They saw power. What they didn't see was the war I was fighting behind closed doors. After the ceremony, I mingled with CEOs and investors. My best friend Sarah handed me a glass of champagne. "You killed it up there," she whispered. I clinked glasses with her. "Thanks. But this is just the beginning." Her smile faltered. She knew me well enough to sense the edge in my voice. "Emily, are you okay? You've been different lately." "A little, harder." I shrugged. That's what it takes to win. I didn't tell her about Meadowbrook. I didn't tell her about the bank statements I had seen, the ones showing my mother's account balance hovering near zero, or the emails Jake had sent to loan sharks, begging for extensions. She wouldn't understand. She believed in second chances. I didn't. The night before my mother was scheduled to come to my office, I sat alone in my penthouse, reviewing everything. Her financial records. Jake's debts. The nursing home application, neatly filled out and ready to be signed. I poured a glass of whiskey, watching the lights of the city stretch into the distance. This city was mine now. Not because it had been given to me, but because I had clawed my way to the top, dragging myself out of the pit they left me in. I thought about my father, about the nights we stayed up late talking about my future, about the pride in his eyes when I got into NYU. He would hate what I was doing. He would tell me to forgive, to find a way to fix the family. But my father was dead. And his legacy had been destroyed by the people he trusted most. They had taught me what loyalty was worth in our family. Nothing. I wasn't just building an empire. I was building my revenge. And tomorrow, my mother would see exactly what that looked like. Do you think I'm wrong for protecting what's mine? Or is it time they finally faced the consequences of their choices? Comment 444 if you're ready to see the tables turn. The day my mother was scheduled to arrive felt like the prelude to a storm. I stood by the window in my office, gazing out at the San Francisco skyline as gray clouds loomed above the city. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. This was the moment I had been building toward, the culmination of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every ounce of pain I had buried beneath my success. Today, I would reclaim my power. Today, she would see what her discarded daughter had become. I adjusted my blazer, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles, though my hands were steady for once. I needed to be calm, composed, untouchable. The folder sat on my desk, its contents meticulously arranged, bank statements showing the steady depletion of my mother's accounts, records of Jake's failed business ventures, photos of him throwing stacks of cash across a blackjack table in Las Vegas. And, on top, the paperwork for Meadowbrook Senior Living, the nursing home I had personally selected as her new home. A knock at the door. My assistant Kara's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock is here." I exhaled slowly, letting the tension coil within me like a loaded spring. "Send her up." Seconds later, the door opened, and there she was. My mother, Linda Carter. The woman who had once kissed my forehead before school every morning. The same woman who had stripped me of my inheritance and handed my future to my brother like it was his birthright. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her designer clothes had been replaced with off-the-rack slacks and a blouse that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, once immaculately styled, was graying and pulled back into a practical bun. But her eyes, those calculating eyes, were the same. They scanned my office, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the awards lining the shelves, the sleek modern desk. This was not the daughter she had dismissed. This was a woman she no longer controlled. "Emily," she breathed, stepping forward, arms outstretched like we were about to embrace. "Your office is beautiful. I'm so proud of you." I didn't move. I didn't smile. "Have a seat." Her arms faltered midair before she quickly masked her discomfort, lowering herself into the chair across from me. She clutched her purse like it was a life raft, her eyes flickering with nerves. "Good. She should be nervous." "I saw the news about your award," she continued, trying to fill the silence. "Your father, he would have been so." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her words like glass. "Let's not pretend. We both know why you're here." Her mouth opened as if to argue, but she must have seen something in my face, something cold, unyielding, because she closed it again. Before she could gather her next lie, the door burst open. Jake. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. His suit was wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight with desperation. "Mom," he said breathlessly, then turned to me. "Emily, we need to talk." My hand hovered over the security button under my desk. "You don't belong here, Jake." "Come on," he pleaded. "We're family." That word again. Family, the same word they had weaponized against me my entire life. Security arrived swiftly. 2 guards flanked him, ready to remove him. He raised his hands in surrender, but looked straight at me. "You don't have to do this." I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head. "I'm not doing anything, Jake. You did this. Now get out." As they dragged him from the room, I saw the panic in my mother's eyes. She knew what was coming. I placed the folder between us. "Let's begin." I opened it, laying out the evidence like exhibits in a courtroom. Bank statements showing overdrafts and loans. Deeds marking the foreclosure on the family house. Photos of Jake gambling, drinks in hand, surrounded by women who were paid to smile. Her face paled as she sifted through the pages. Where did you get all this?" "Money buys excellent investigators." She looked up, tears gathering in her eyes. "Emily, please." "No," I snapped. "You don't get to cry. You don't get to act like the victim. You chose him. You gave him everything. You watched him destroy it all. And you never once looked back at me." "I thought he would take care of us," her voice cracked. "I thought." "You thought wrong," I cut her off. "And now you want me to clean up his mess." She wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. "We're family." I laughed. It was sharp, bitter, devoid of warmth. "Family? That word means nothing to me anymore." She recoiled as though I had slapped her. I slid the Meadowbrook paperwork across the desk. "This is your future." She picked up the packet, eyes scanning the description of the shared room, the meal plan, the visiting hours. "No. Emily, please," her voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't do this. I have nowhere else to go." "You had a choice," I said. 5 years ago, you made it. Now, this is mine." Her hand shook as she clutched the pen. She hesitated. "If your father were here." "He's not," I said, my voice cold. "Because you trusted Jake. And now everything Dad built is gone." Tears streamed freely down her face. "I made a mistake." I leaned forward, my voice low and firm. "Sign it. Or walk out with nothing." A long silence stretched between us. Then, her shoulders collapsed. She signed. As she set the pen down, her eyes met mine. What happened to you? I held her gaze, steel beneath my skin. You did. I expected to feel triumph as I took the papers. I had won. I held all the cards. She had come to me, and I had reduced her to this, a signature on a piece of paper, sealing her fate. But as she stood to leave, clutching her purse, her face stained with tears, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. Just emptiness. I watched her walk toward the door, her steps slow and heavy. She paused, turning back once more. I hope this makes you happy. It didn't. When she was gone, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the papers in my hands. Justice served. That's what I had wanted, right? To show them both that I was more than what they believed. But why did it feel so hollow? Have you ever gotten exactly what you thought you wanted, only to realize it didn't heal the wounds they left behind? Comment 555 if you think this is the justice I deserved. That night, the night before everything was supposed to be final, I couldn't sleep. The papers were signed, the arrangements made. Tomorrow morning, Meadowbrook would send their transport van to pick my mother up. By noon, she would be settled into her new life, the one I had chosen for her. The one she had earned. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, letting the burn coat my throat as I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city stretched beneath me, lights flickering like stars. San Francisco was mine. Every contract signed, every deal closed, every award displayed on my shelf, it was all mine. I had built it from nothing. Without her. Without him. Without anyone. But as I stared out over my kingdom, the satisfaction I had craved still eluded me. A knock at the door shattered the quiet. It was nearly midnight. I frowned, setting my glass down. When I opened the door, Jake stood there. He reeked of alcohol. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, but there was something different, something beyond the usual desperation. He clutched an envelope in his hand, fingers trembling. We need to talk, he slurred slightly, but his voice was softer than I expected. Please, Emily. Every instinct told me to slam the door. To let him drown in his failures, like he had let me drown in mine. But I stepped aside. He stumbled into my living room, sinking onto the couch like his body had given up. He held out the envelope. What is this? I asked, wary. It's from Dad, he said. His voice cracked. I found it when Mom was packing up her place. She didn't know it was there. It must have been tucked in with his old papers. I opened it with careful fingers. It was his handwriting, strong, deliberate, the way I remembered it. My chest tightened as I began to read. To my children. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't know what the future will look like for you both, but I know this, what I built was never about money. It was about love. About family. I built that house for us to grow together. I saved every dollar so you could have choices I never had. Take care of each other. Love is the only legacy that matters. Dad. The room blurred as tears filled my eyes. I blinked them back, swallowing the lump in my throat. My father, the man who had believed in me, was still here in these words. He had left us a final lesson, one we had all ignored. Jake leaned forward, head in his hands. I messed up, Emily. I know I did. I thought I was honoring him by trying to be the man he wanted me to be. But I wasn't him. I was never him. And I hate myself for it. I wanted to scream at him. To remind him that I had suffered while he squandered everything. But I didn't. Because for the first time, he wasn't making excuses. He was just broken. I know you hate me, he whispered. And maybe you always will. But I had to show you this. Because Dad was right. We lost him, and then we lost each other. That's not what he wanted. He stood up, swaying slightly. I'm sorry for everything. I mean it. He turned to leave. Good luck tomorrow. But before he reached the door, I said it. Words I never thought I'd say. Jake. He paused. Get home safe. His shoulders sagged with relief, and he nodded before disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, my father's letter resting in my lap, staring at it until the sun began to rise. At 8 a.m., I called Meadowbrook. I canceled everything. At 9 a.m., I knocked on my mother's door. She answered, her eyes puffy and red. She had been crying, probably all night, knowing what was coming. I'm not sending you to Meadowbrook, I said simply. She stared at me, stunned. I found Dad's letter, I continued, holding it out. She took it with trembling hands, reading his words. Her face crumpled. I'm moving you into a condo. It's in a good neighborhood. Safe. Clean. But there are conditions. She nodded quickly, like she would agree to anything. We start family therapy. You, me, and Jake. Weekly. Non-negotiable. Of course, she whispered. And Jake's money, what's left of it, it goes into a trust. For your living expenses. I'll manage it. No more handouts. No more secrets. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they felt different. Not manipulative. Just, human. Thank you, Emily. I don't deserve this. You don't, I said honestly. But Dad deserves better than what we've become. We moved her that afternoon. I signed the lease on a high-rise condo with security and a view, nothing like Meadowbrook. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Months passed. Therapy wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to walk out and never look back. There were days my mother cried, and Jake stormed out, unable to face what he had done. But slowly, painfully, we began to untangle the mess we had made of each other. Jake got sober. He took a job in construction, starting at the bottom. He didn't complain. He worked. Mom started volunteering at a local shelter, finding purpose in helping others. She stopped asking me for money. She stopped comparing me to Jake. And me? I kept building my company. But for the first time, I started building something else too, a relationship with the family I thought I had lost. A year later, I stood on stage again. This time, it was the Business Women's Conference. I was there to give the keynote address. I looked out at the crowd, hundreds of ambitious women, just like me. My mother was in the front row. Jake was beside her. They weren't perfect. Neither was I. But we were trying. I held the microphone, pausing for a moment before speaking. When I started my business, I thought success was about money. Power. Winning at all costs. But I was wrong. True success is having the courage to choose healing over revenge. Because legacy isn't wealth. It's love. It's the people who stand beside you when everything else is gone. The audience erupted in applause. But my eyes stayed on my mother and Jake. My family. We were still standing. Do you believe that true strength is choosing to heal, even when it's the hardest thing to do? Comment 666 if you believe strong women always win. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how far I've come, not just in my career, but as a person. There was a time when I thought success meant proving everyone wrong, standing at the top while those who doubted me looked up in regret. And for a while, that fueled me. Every late night, every closed deal, every award, I told myself it was all worth it because I had won. But the truth? Winning like that felt empty. Revenge might have given me power, but it didn't give me peace. What brought me peace, what truly made me feel like I had succeeded, was choosing to heal. Choosing to rebuild something broken, even when every part of me wanted to walk away. It wasn't easy. Forgiveness never is. Sitting across from my mother in those therapy sessions, hearing her apologize and finally admitting her mistakes, it didn't erase the years of pain. It didn't make me forget the nights I cried alone in my tiny apartment, wondering why I wasn't good enough. But it helped me move forward. It gave me the chance to redefine what family meant on my terms. And Jake, seeing him work his way back from rock bottom, watching him fight his demons instead of hiding behind our mother's protection, that was something I never thought I'd witness. We'll never be the siblings we were as kids, but we're something better now. We're honest. We're real. I know some of you watching this might be holding on to your own pain, maybe from a parent who let you down, a sibling who betrayed you, or a family that made you feel like you didn't matter. And I understand that anger. I know what it's like to want to make them pay. But I also know this, holding on to that anger doesn't heal you. It only cages you in. Real strength is deciding to break free from that cage. Real power is choosing to heal, even when it's the hardest thing to do. So now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a betrayal like mine? Have you ever had to choose between revenge and forgiveness? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. And who knows? Your story might be the one that gives someone else the strength to heal. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in the strength of women, in the power of choosing growth over bitterness, please, like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to this channel. We're building a community here, a place where we uplift each other, where we prove that no matter what life throws at us, we rise. Because that's what strong women do. We rise. Together.